Shabbos.
Shabbos. Good Shabbos. Well, sorry for the delay. We had a couple of technical issues that had to get ironed out.
The good news is we always know if there's a problem, so just hang tight, we'll be with you.
Right. We saw some of the people who were watching signed off, and hopefully they'll come back.
Yeah.
And I guess we'll just see. So, the last time we got together this early, we were starting to have little lessons about the high holidays, and we talked about that. And so next week, I think we're going to just get started with the preliminary service right now, but next week we're going to start learning about some of the prayers. And we're going to work backwards from Aleinu, and maybe we'll get the Kaddish and some of the stuff that's at the end. Yeah. And so then we'll work backwards and we'll go forwards and we'll get it all. Right now we're on page 65. And away we go. A little traveling music, mister.
It's like, hold on to your hats, because this here is the wildest service in the wilderness. Yeah.
Okay, make sure that crossbar on your lap is steady.
You can't be at Disneyland, might as well pretend you are, right?
You must be at least this tall to daven.
Yeah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lesech v'bina l'chavchin ben yom uven layla.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani b'tzamo.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani ben chori.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach ivri.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumi.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kefufi.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam rakah haaretz al hamayim.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shasali kol tzorki.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin mitzadei gaver.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael b'gvura.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tifara.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten le'aif koach. Amen, amen. And we'll continue on page 81. Here we go. Mizmor Shir Hanakat Habayit LeDavid. You have transformed my mourning, my eulogies into dancing for me. You've opened my sackcloth, you've taken off, and you've robed me in joy. הפקת מספדי למחולי, פיתחת שקי ותעזרני שמחה, למען יזמך כבוד ולא ידום, אדוני אלוהי לעולם מודך. And to end the Birchot HaShachar, Mourner's Kaddish is on page 82.
Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rava.
Amen.
V'olama divarach direute v'yamlich malchute v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei b'chol Beit Yisrael ba'agala v'zman kari v'yimru.
Amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevorach le'olam olomei olmaya.
Yitparach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitrabam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yithale v'yithalal shemei dekudisha
Brichu.
Le'ela min kol birachata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran bi'alma v'yimru.
Amen.
Yehi shalama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimru.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'nuramav v'yaseh shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael ve'imru.
Amen. And now we're going to begin Pesukei de Zimra, verses of song, on page 83. Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam, Baruch hu, Baruch oseh v'reshit, Baruch omer v'yosef, Baruch ozer u'mekayim, Baruch merachem al haaretz, Baruch merachem al habriot, Baruch mishalem sachar tov l'reav, Baruch chai la'ad v'kayam lanetzach, Baruch bodeh u'matzil, Baruch shemo. Yachid Chayolami Melech Meshubakim for our Adej Ad Shemo Hagadol, Baruch Atah Adonai Melech Mehula Batishbacho. Okay, on page 85, we're going to continue at the bottom of 85. Romimu, Romimu, Adonai Eloheinu, V'ishtachavu, Ishtachavu, Lahadom Raglav Kadoshu, Romimu, Romimu, Adonai Eloheinu, V'ishtachavu, Lahar Kadsho, Ki Kadosh, Adonai Eloheinu, Hey. And we'll continue on page 86, top of the bottom paragraph. Hoshia et amecha, uvarech et nachalatecha, urem, 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 v'nasem ad ha'olam.
Hoshia
Et amecha, uvarech et nachalatecha, Urem, 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 v'nasem ad ha'olam. And we will continue on page 88. The hits just keep coming. And here's three in one psalm. In this acrostic psalm, number 34, we're going down to the Gimel, and presto, change-o, you're in the Torah service. Gadlu l'Adonai iti, u'neromem ha'shemo yachdav. And now imagine you just finished eating and you're at the end of Birkat HaMazon at the Yud.
That was a quick service.
It was a quick, and the Kiddush was all included.
Delicious, too.
Yes. I missed that. Well, there's a lot of things I miss. Yiru et Adonai kedoshav, ki ein machzor lireyav, gefirim rashu v'ra'evu, v'dorshei Adonai lo yasu chol tov. And down to the Mem. Mi ha'ish hechafetz chayim, ohev yamim, liroto, nitzor lishon chameira, u'sfatecha medaber mirma, sur meirav yaseh tov, bakei shalom v'rodfehu, mi ha'ish hechafetz chayim, ohev yamim lirotov. And we are going to continue now on page 92, and we're just going to start at the beginning here. Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki le'olam chasdo. Hodu le'Elohei ha'Elohim, ki le'olam chasdo. Hodu l'Adonai Adonim ki le'olam chasdo lo seniflaot gidolo levado ki le'olam chasdo. Last four, Shebishifleinu zachar lanu ki le'olam chasdo vayifrekenu mitzareinu ki le'olam chasdo.
Notei
Lechem lechol basar ki le'olam chasdo. Ose hodu le'el hashamayim
Hashamayim ki le'olam chasdo.
I'll buy that. I think that was my mistake. Thinking ahead and not thinking of the present. Okay. Gotta get it out of that mindset.
I got a little distracted looking at a picture of Shelley and Rebecca here because the light is coming through these stained glass windows with the,
It's beautiful. Sheldon's decorated with a red and green light from the stained glass.
yeah.
And Rebecca is lit from the reflection off the seat of the same thing.
Yeah.
And let's just go through who's here. There's Charlene and the Zakowskis and the Wilkoffs and Ann Zane and Yudi and Helen Bresinoff.
And we have a very special place of honor for our current president. Susan Baum's right here in the front row, front seat.
I think that's very good of her to do that.
Yeah.
And the Davises and the Singers, and there's Doris. Who's on that chair there? They seem to have fallen down. They can't
Oh,
get up.
that's Anita.
Oh, that's
Mesnikov.
Anita? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know who that is, but we'll get to them later on. Anyway, so it's, at least we get to see your faces.
Yeah.
We are on page 96, and we're going to do the beginning and the end of Ashrei.
Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha Odi Halelu Chasela
Ashrei Am
Shekacha Lo Ashrei Am Shadonai Eloham Tila Ledavid Amim Cholam Abol. Tehillah Adonai Yidaber Bi Vivarech Kol Basar Shem Kol Sholel Va'ed V'anachnu Nivarech Yah Me'ata V'yad Olam Hallelujah.
And down at the bottom of 97, the last couple of lines. Yimloch Adonai
Le'olam Elohai Yitzion Dor Vador Hallelujah.
And we'll go over to page 99, 5 lines from the bottom. Yahalelu et Shem Adonai, ki niskav shemo levado, hodo aleh. I got the wrong key. Hodo aleh v'shamayim, vayarem keren li'amo, tila lechol chasidav, Livnei Yisrael am kirovo. Hallelujah, hallelujah. And on page 100 in the middle section, hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Hallelujah, El Bikocho, hallelujah, Birki Auzo, hallelujah, Vigvurotav, hallelujah, Kirogulo, hallelujah, Beteka Shofar, hallelujah, Benevel Bechinor, hallelujah, Betopu Machol, hallelujah, Beminim ve'ugav, hallelujah. V'tziltzilei shama, hallelujah. V'tziltzilei truah, kol ha'neshama, hallelujah, hallelujah, Hallelujah. Kol haneshama Hallelujah. 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 And on page 101, 3 lines down from the top. L'cho Adonai hagidula v'hagivura v'hatiferet v'hanetzach v'hahod ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz L'cho Adonai ha'mamlacha v'minaseh l'chol erosh. And we will continue on page 102 as we do the marching version of the Song of the Sea. Az yashir Moshe u'vnei Yisrael et hashir hazol Adonai vayomeru lehemor ashir al Adonai ki ga'ol ga'asus v'rochem v'oram avayam Ozi v'zimrat Yavayehi li lishua Ze'eli ve'anvehu Elohei aviv v'aram amenu Adonai ish melchama Adonai shemo Arkevod paro v'chelo yarav hayam U'mivcha shalishavdu be'uviyamsu Michamocha. And we are going to continue on page 104 in the middle, top of the middle section. Ilufinu male shira, shira kayamu, shonenu rina kamon galav. Ilufinu male shira, Male shira, shira kayamu, shonenu rina kamon galav. Male shira kayamu, shonenu rina kamon galav. And we'll continue on page 105 at the end of the first paragraph. Nehalechu nshabechecho u'nefarechecho u'nevarech et shem kodshecha k'amor leDavid baruchi nafshi et Adonai v'chol karovai et shem kodsho ha'el b'tatzumo ruzecha hagedol b'chvod shemecha hagibor lanetzach v'hanora b'noratecha hamelech hayoshev al kisei ram v'nisa. 105, third paragraph, Shochenad.
Shochenad maram v'kadosh shemo.
Shochenad maram v'kadosh shemo.
V'chadu rananu tzadikim Adonai v'yesharim navatihila v'vishanim nidala v'divrei tzadikim nidbarach Uvilajal chasedim did Ramam, V'kelev gedoshim did Kadash, U'machalot v'vahod amchavid Yisrael. Lihodohu lalel shabeach, L'felo meim lehadeh, L'varech lalel lekaleis, Al divrei shirot v'tishbechot, David ben Yishai avdecha mishichecha.
And then, if you can, you're invited to rise, page 106, Yishtabach.
Yishtabach shivcha makinu el melech levash my heart Birachat v'odot me'atav yad olam baruch Adonai El melech v'latish bachot El ahodot Adonai nivlot הבחר בשירי זמרה מלך, אלוהי עולמים.
Amen.
יתגדל שמי רבה,
אמן.
ולבה תברח רעותי, והמלך מלכותי, בחייך וביומך, ובחייך בית ישראל, בעגלה, ובזמן קריב אמרהו.
Amen.
יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם לא מעלמיה, יתברך, יתברך וישתבח, ויתבר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר, ויתהלל ויתהלל שמי לקודשה.
בריחו.
ויהי להאמין כל ברכתה ושירתה. תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן מעלמה ואמרהו.
Amen. And continue standing for the Baruch on page 107.
ברכו את אדוני המבורך.
Baruch Hamvorach. Baruch Adonai Hamvorach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai המבורך לעולם ועד.
And we continue now with the first of two blessings before the Shema. Join me at the beginning of it, will you? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or uvarei choshech oseh shalom uvarei et hakol. And we continue to the bottom of 107 silently.
הקדוש והכל ישבחוך והכל מלואין קדוש קרנה הכל אין גגיך ויצולדך אפס בדך מידו מלך אין גגיך אדוני אלוהינו בעולם הזה ואין זולדך מלכינו לחיי עולם הבא אפס בדך גואלינו למות המשיח ואין המלך המושיענו לתחיית המתים
108 El Adon.
El Adon HaKol HaMasim Baruch Mevorach Beviko Neshama Galo V'tuvo Malei Olam Dad Devona Sovevi Moto Hamid Gael Al Chayot HaKodesh V'nehedar B'chavod Al HaMechava Zechud U'mishor Livnei Chizo Chesed V'rachamim Livnei Chevodo טובים מאורות שברא אלוהינו יצרם בדעת בבינה ובשכל כוח וגבורה נתן בהם להיות מושלים בקרב תבל מלאים זיו מפיקים נוגה נוער זיו בכל העולם שמחים בצדם וששים בבואם עושים בהם הרצון כהונה פגר וכבוד נענים ולשמו צהלה ורינה לזכר מלכותו קרא לשמש ויזרח אור והדגיר צורת הלבנה שבח נענים לו כל צבא מרום תפארת וגדולה שבחים ואופנים וחיות הקודש.
And we continue on 109, the top two paragraphs we read to ourselves.
לאל אשר שבא מכל המעשים במשפט על משפט כיסא כבודו
We're on page 110.
kulam huvim kulam birulim kulam giborim kulam mosim aviarison kulam kulam borkim et biem bigdush avet tahara bishima vezim raham bach mishabachim farim marizim magishim mahamlichim Eshem el agado hagibo behanor agadosh
וכולם מקבלים עליה מלכות שמיים זנים זה
Binachad huach, psafar vavnima, kiddush aglam gechadonim yorimira. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melech haaretz gedodo. Vavani v'chayot hakodesh b'rash gado, minasim l'matzravim, Zmadam shabachim ve'omrim Baruch kavod Adonai b'mkomo Ve'al barach mi'otideinu l'melech chavegam Or chadash al Zion da'ir v'nizkech l'lanu me'ira le'ora Or chadash al Zion da'ir v'nizkech l'lanu me'ira le'ora Baruch atah Adonai
Baruch Shemo
Yotzer ha'me'ora
Amen. Page 111, the second blessing before the Shema, Ahava Rabbah.
Ava Rabba Avdanu Adonai Eloheinu Chem el Agdola B'Tera Chamal Aleinu Avinu Malkeinu Ba'avur Avodeinu Shebaruch V'cha Shebaruch V'cha Avinu Malkeinu V'tilamdem Chukei Chayim K'dirchanenu Lamedeinu Avinu Av Harachaman Merachim Rachim Aleinu V'dein B'libeinu Lehavin Lehavin L'Haskil Lishma L'Livavadu L'Elamed Lishma V'Lasot V'Likayim Erkod Imrei Talmud Torah Yahava V'Ha'eleinu B'Toratecha V'Damik Libeinu B'Mitzvotecha V'Yachidu Levavinu V'Yachava Lira Et Shemecha V'Lo Nevot V'Yachava V'Lo Nevot V'Olam V'Ed Ki V'Shem Kodshecha Agadav Hanarav Adavnu Nagila V'Nizmecha Nagila V'Nizmecha V'Yeshuatecha V'Havienu V'Shalom
Tzitzit.
Me'yariba Ganivodares V'Tolicheinu K'hamimeu Le'yartzenu Ki Elibu El Yeshudada Uva'adu V'charita Mikol HaMelasham V'Gira V'Tahanu V'Shimcha HaGadol Selah Ve'yemet Li'od Alecha V'li'acherecha Be'yahava Baruch atah Adonai
Shemo
Habocher b'yamo Yisrael B'yahava Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad ויחבצה את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושינתם לבניך ודיברת בם ושבתך בביתך ולכתך בדרך ושכבך ובקומך וקשרתם להודע ידיך וילדתם עוד מניניך וכתבתם המזוזות ביתך ובשעריך.
And the next two paragraphs very quietly.
אדוני אלוהיכם אמת וישים מקום בקרוב. ותלבדו גם לשמה גם בכיסונו כל המלכותו ואמונתו לעד קיימת.
Release the tzitzit.
Makenu melakabodenu kolenu kovelabodenu tzvenu tzveshuadenu odenu matzilenu melavshimecha enu izulatecha
114.
ezadabodenu adahul meolah. Emet, 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 atahul rishon. Emet, 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 atahul acharon. Umibaladecha inadu melech, melech goelu Moshiach. Umibaladecha inadu melech, melech goelu Moshiach.
Mimitzrayim galtam.
Tilo lelyon, Baruch u'mivorach, Moshe b'nei Yisrael, Echanu shirah, b'simcha rabba v'yamru kulam.
You're invited to stand.
Mi chamocha v'yilim Adonai, mi chamocha v'edam HaKodesh, nahuradi hilon, v'asei v'elech. Shira chadasha shebechul geolim l'shimchas v'adayam kachad kulam hadavim lichu v'yamreu Adonai imlach le'olam va'ed Tzvah Yisrael kulma b'ezrat Yisrael u'v'dech numecha Yehuda v'Yisrael Rov alinem Adonai tzvahot shebaho Kidosh Yisrael Baruch Adonai Israel.
The Amidah for this morning is said silently and standing from page 115, A or B, skipping page 116 for now. We'll get it during the repetition. And then continuing from 117 to 120. It's a silent meditation. You can add whatever's in your heart to whatever's on the page. The reader's repetition of the Amidah will begin on page 115A. You can remain seated till we get to 116 for the Kedusha.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avoteinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Ha'el HaGadol HaGibur VeHaNora El Elyon Gomel Chazadim Tovim Mekonei HaKol V'Zocher Chasdei Avot Mevi Goel Livnei Bneihem V'man Shemo B'Yahava Melech Hazel Moshiach L'Magim Baruch Atah Adonai Magin Avraham Hadar Gibor Le'olam Adonai Melech Emetim Adar L'Hoshia Mashiva Ruach Marid HaGashem Mechagel Chaim Bechesed Bechayim Edim Mirachamim Rabim Samech Nafim Veravech Cholim Umadir Asurim Umekayim Emunadali Shenei Avar Michamocha Givurot Umira Melach Melech Memit Umichayah Umashmeach Yeshua V'ne'eman Adal Chayot Medim Baruch Atah Adonai Mechayeh Hametim.
Amen. Page 116.
Nikadesh Shimcha Ba'olam Gishem Magishim Odo Bishmei Marav Kagadu V'Yaneviecha V'Garazel Zeve Amar Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Tzivahot Melech Haaretz Kivodo Hasbi Karash Gadol Hadiv Chazak Mashbim Go Minasim L'Ulmatzir Rahavim L'Madam Baruch Yom Mehiru Baruch Yivod Adonai Mim Gomo Bimkom Chamakinu Toviyah V'dim Loch Aleinu G'melagim Anachnu Lach Madach Tivach B'Zion B'Karol B'Yameinu L'Elam V'Tishkon Tid Gadol V'Tid Gadash B'Dach B'Shahim Yirecha L'Dor V'Dor L'Nitzach Nitzachim V'Eineinu Tirena Malchutecha Kadavar Amar B'Shirei Uzecha Ayidei David Meshiach Tzidkecha Yimloch Adonai Le'olam Elohai Tzion L'dor v'dor Hallelujah L'dor v'dor Nagid Kol Lecha U'le'nitzach Nitzachim L'shadach HaNagdish V'shivcha Eloheinu L'mipinu L'musar L'ma'ed Ki HaMelech L'vakadosh Ata Baruch Atah Adonai
Baruch Shemo.
Ha'el HaKadosh
Amen. Page 117.
Yismach Moshe b'madnar chel Kiev v'ne'eman karatalo kalil tiveret b'ro shonatata b'yamna levanecha al har Sinai shnei luchot avanim horid b'yado v'chatuv b'hem shemirat shachabat v'chatuv b'hem shemirat shachabat v'chatuv b'hem shemirat shachabat V'chigadu b'toratecha V'shamru v'nei Yisrael Et ha-Shabbat L'asot et ha-Shabbat L'dodam b'rit olam B'nei uvein b'nei Yisrael Oti le'olam, b'nei uvei, b'nei Israel, Oti le'olam, ki sheished yamim, asa Adonai, et hashamayim, v'et haaretz, v'yom hashvi, Shabbat vayinavash, v'yom hashvi, Shabbat vayinavash. V'lo nidadav, Adonai Eloheinu, G'eraz of Eloheinu, Chad Hamakin of David Zilim, V'gamenu Chad Dalash, G'nu Barehilim, G'id Israel, Amcha Nidada B'Yahava, L'Zer Yaakov, Asher B'Macharda, Ahami Kadosh Eshuvi, Kula Mizbivid, Adgulu Mituvecha, Vashvi Ratita B'Kidashto, Chem Nadi Habim Waham Takarada, Zecher, Lema'aseh V'Reshit, Eloheinu, Ve'Elohi Avodeinu, Ritzei V'Mnuchateinu, Kadusheinu B'mitzvotecha, V'teinchel Gidul B'Toratecha, Sabeinu Mitzuvecha, V'samcheinu B'Shuvatecha, V'taher Libeinu Li'ovdecha B'Emet, V'hanchilenu Adonai Eloheinu, B'Yachova U'V'Ratzah, Shabbat Kodechecha V'Yanu Kulva Yisrael, V'Kadesh Shemecha, Baruch Atah Adonai, V'Kadesh HaShabbat.
Page 118.
Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu b'Amcha Yisrael v'Tefillah v'Hashem v'Novodalim v'Beitecha. Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu b'Amcha Yisrael v'Tefillah v'Hashem v'Novodalim v'Beitecha u'Tefillah b'Yahava de'Gavel b'Ratzon Ratzon Damid Avodat Israel Lamecha U'Tefilata B'Yahava De'Kabel Ratzon Ratzon Damid Avodat Israel Lamecha Ritzei V'Techesena Eineinu B'Shavcha L'Tzion Rachamim Baruch Atah Adonai
Shemo.
Amen. Marim, Anachnu Atav Gilacharachamecha, Amerachtim Gilod Amachazadcha, Melacham Givinu La.
Middle of 119.
V'yahol Kulamid Barach V'Tram Shimcha Makin Tzamid L'Olam B'Em V'Cholachayim Yadu L'Chazelah V'Yahol Shimcha B'Emet V'Yahol Shaden Ezradinu Zela Barach Atah Adonai Adon Shimcha L'Chalel Le'odon Eloheinu V'Eloi Avodeinu Baruch Tenu L'Bracha Hamishu Eshet B'Torah, K'duvaydi Moshe Avdecha, Ha'amrami Pi'aronu B'Nav, Kohanim K'Rushecha K'amor, Yivarechecha Adonai V'yishmerecha, Yair Adonai, Panav Elecha V'chuneka, Adonai, Panav Elecha, V'yazehim Lecha Shalom.
Page 120.
Sim shalom dova vracha balam chin v'chesed v'rachamim Alinu aleinu v'al kol Yisrael amecha Sim shalom dova vracha balam chin v'chesed v'rachamim Alinu aleinu V'al kol Yisrael amecha Baruchinu Avinu kol hanegecha korbanecha V'yorbanecha nadat alanu Adonai Eloheinu Torah chaim yavar chesed V'tzidaka v'viracha v'rachamim v'chayim v'shalom V'tov beinecha v'varech et amcha Yisrael B'chol eid u'b'chol shah b'shlomecha Baruch atah Adonai
Baruch Shemo.
Hamivarech d'amo Yisrael b'shalom.
Amen. And now we say adieu to Shacharit. We say goodbye. Right? On page 138 with Kaddish Shalem.
Yigdav Glashem Rabba.
Amen.
Ve'amari Baruch Hu Mechon V'Mechon V'Chel Yisrael. B'Aglav Yisman Karev V'Yimru. Amen. Yesh Mei Rabba Mivorach. Yeholam Olam Elmaya. Yitbarach. Yitbarach Shtabach. Yitbarach Nominasev. David David Alal Shebei De Kodesha. Eila B'Go Berchatav Shivatav. Shivatav Nechamatav. Amiram Belma V'Yimru.
Amen.
Tid Gabes Lodan Vodan D'Cho Yisrael. God of all the Vishmael V'Yimru.
Amen.
Peace, love, love, and Shemai, V'chaim, Alinu, V'achol Israel, V'Yimru.
Amen.
V'azeh Shalom, B'mramav, V'yazeh Shalom, Alinu, V'al Kol Yisrael, V'Yimru. Amen.
Shkoach.
Ruchtia.
We continue now on page 139 with our version of the Torah service.
Ein kamacha v'Elohim Adonai v'ein k'ma'asecha malechudecha malechut kol olamim u'memshadecha b'chol dor v'dor Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai imlach ve'olam v'oed Adonai oz li'amo yidin Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom avarachamim itiva v'tzonecha et Zion tivnecha Yerushalayim tivnecha omot Yerushalayim Kivicha livad badachnu melech eram v'nizal adon olamim Vayhi b'Zohara vayomer Moshe Kuma Adonai v'yafuzu oivecha v'yanusu mizonecha mipanecha ki b'tzion teisei dora ki b'tzion teisei dora livar Adonai v'Yerushalayim Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Baruch Shenatan Torah Torah Ve'amo Yisrael v'Kedushato.
We turn to page 140, second paragraph, Be'an al-Rachetz.
Be'an arachis v'lish me'kadisha kadisha yakira anay mar
Well, it's nice to be back.
It's good to have you back.
It's good to be had. Okay. A number of interesting things have happened in the history of the Jewish people this week. You know how some weeks you get a lot of good stuff that happens? We have a short list of good stuff this week. Let's just see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. On October the 25th, this is a good thing, 1867, October the 25th, 1867, Maimonides College opened up in Philadelphia. You were in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
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 I was in Wilmington. We ships in the night
Absolutely.
over decades. And then, in 1939, Poland passed anti-kashrut laws. Now, here, you know what an auto-da-fe is?
Yeah.
Burning at the stake.
Yeah.
Well, on October the 27th, 1765, the last public auto-da-fe was held in Portugal.
Fantastic.
I'm saying that it's a horrible thing, but at least it was the last one. On October the 28th, 1784, is a birthday. In 1784, anyone want to guess? Sir Moses Montefiore, an English philanthropist and a social leader, was born on October 28th, 1784. Let's see here. And here's a mixed message. On October the 29th, 1833, all the Jews of Hesse-Kassel, except for peddlers and petty traders, were granted full equality. I guess the peddlers and the petty traders were counted at 3/5 of a person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They hadn't yet unionized.
No, we hadn't gotten to that stage yet.
Yeah.
The Balaganistas. October 30th, also not agreed. 1682, Pope Innocent XI forbade Jews in Rome to engage in banking, and shortly after they all went broke. So, and October the 31st, that's today. Not a lot of trick-or-treating going on, but here's the trick. In 1497, and I'm only saying this because it's today, October 31st, 1497 was the date by which Jews had to leave Portugal. Yeah. So next week we're looking for better news. Okay. Well, the parsha today is Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha means get going, get yourself going. Shabbat ends tonight at 6:38. And we're in the second triennial cycle. So there are things that happened in the beginning of the Parsha that we're not going to have today, and things that happen at the end of the Parsha that we're not going to have today. But in the middle, we'll have those. But something that happens sort of at the beginning, actually even before we get to our Parsha. I don't know if you ever noticed this, but the 4 big stories that happened before we get to meet Abraham, or Avraham, or as he's known, Avram in the early stages of his story. The first story of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah, and the Tower of Babel. And they all seem to be revolving around the theme of responsibility, or rather a lack of responsibility. Adam and Eve both deny personal responsibility. She made me do it. And she says, the snake made me do it. And it's the snake's fault. And so they deny personal responsibility. Cain denies moral responsibility. What, am I my brother's keeper? And God gives him the chance. He asks the question, where's your brother? And he blows the chance entirely. Noah fails the test of collective responsibility because he only saved himself and his family. And Babel was something similar to that, but it's really the people of Babel, when they were building the tower, just didn't care about each other. The Midrash goes on about how if a person fell from the tower while it was building, They said, they didn't say anything, they didn't even notice, but if a brick fell, they cried because they had to go and carry a brick from the bottom back up to the top. So we see the story of avoiding responsibility goes back as far as storytelling itself. For almost as long as we've been around, we've blamed everything that's gone wrong on anything but ourselves. And frankly, we still do this a lot today, and not just Jews. In the past, people blamed the stars, the fates, the furies, the gods. Today, you might as well today people blame their parents, their social upbringings, their environment, their genes, their educational system, and the complex of ethnic minorities that make up all the people that we are today. And when everything else fails, and none of those things you can blame on, you can't blame anything on these things, people will blame the Jews. That's a recurring theme. There's a joke. It's a Jewish joke that says this, it indicates this trend a little bit better than a philosophical treatise. For a year, Rabbi Cohen had labored to teach his unruly class the book of Joshua. Nobody was paying attention. You remember Hebrew school. So he makes the end of the year exam as easy as possible. He thinks he's going to give this softball question. He asked Marvin at the back of the room, "Who destroyed the walls of Jericho?" And Marvin says, "Please, sir, it wasn't me." And he's speechless, practically. He goes and reports this to Marvin's parents, and instead of apologizing, he'll do much better, he'll study. They say, if Marvin says it wasn't him, it wasn't him. In despair, he goes to the president of the congregation, tells him the story, or her the story. The president listens, opens the drawer, gets out the checkbook, writes in it, he says, "Here's $1,000. Get the walls repaired and stop complaining." Nobody owns up. And everybody thinks that even in a question where you're not supposed to own up, you're just supposed to know who did it. Well, so then, in contrast, along comes Avram, Abraham, the progenitor of us all. Abraham, over the years, was co-opted by all three of the major monotheistic faiths. We, of course, had him first, so we know him, I like to think, the best. But Abraham was the first character in our story to take responsibility. The parsha starts off with God talking to Abraham, saying, "Lech lecha, get yourself going. Leave your land, your birthplace, and your father's house, and go to a place that I will show you. You don't even know where it is." And when you surrender like that to the will of God, there's a certain amount of freedom that you feel. You know, if you surrender to a bigger cause, let's just take it out of the religious realm for a little bit. Anybody who identifies with a bigger cause feels a certain sense of freedom. You know, they take responsibility, they take the blame, they take the credit. When you do that, you're more fully human. You accept the credit or the blame where it's meant to be. And some people want to take that away from you too. And not just Jews who say, it was like that when I found it wasn't me. But three of the most famous people to say, it wasn't your fault, it was the conditions. You didn't have a choice. Three of those people, well, the most famous ones, I think, were of Jewish backgrounds. And they had rejected Judaism. The first one was Spinoza, who argued that all human behavior can be explained by the laws of cause and effect. Science can explain it. You didn't make that choice. You had no choice in making that choice. It was all because of what came before and what led up to it and the conditions. Science and determinism, Spinoza said, made you make that choice. The second one was Karl Marx, who said that history was made by economic factors. You didn't make that choice. Your economic environment made that choice. You know, you're going to be, you don't have any control over what's going on. And the third one was Sigmund Freud, who contended that all actions are the result of unconscious and irrational drives, particularly in the early years of childhood, like the Oedipus complex, the conflict between fathers and sons. You didn't make that choice. Your subconscious made that choice. And unwittingly, these three guys didn't know that they provided the best commentary on the opening verse of today's Parsha. Lech lecha, get yourself going. Marx said that the human behavior is determined by economic factors like the ownership of land. So God says to Abraham, leave your land. Spinoza said that conduct is driven by instincts given at birth. So God says to Abraham, leave your place of birth. And Freud said that we're influenced by our relationship with our father, and so God says to Abraham, leave your father's house. That verse, which came, a couple thousand years ahead of these three people, has an answer for all three of them. Take the responsibility yourself. Now, Abraham wasn't perfect, He pawned his wife off as his sister. He doesn't say anything when he's commanded to sacrifice his son. We have some beefs with Abraham as a family man, but take a look and see how Abraham's life answers the examples of the people who came before him. Where Adam and Eve hid from God and blamed each other and the snake for their actions, Abraham doesn't blame anybody. When Sarah banishes Hagar's son Ishmael into the desert, Abraham struggles with the idea because it's a son of his and he doesn't want to treat him badly. And God has to tell him everything's going to be okay. Noah didn't try to save anybody else, but Abraham pleads for the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom and Amorah. And unlike the civil but uncaring builders of the Tower of Babel, he has his tent open to all four directions so he can see who's coming down the road so he can offer hospitality. And nobody is telling him to do these things. Nobody says you got to do these things to be good. He just does them. He accepts the responsibility of being a human being. And he knows that he's surrounded by people who are not like him. God brings them into the promised land. 5 verses later, they got to go to Egypt because of a famine. He's very familiar with all the different kinds of people around him. He knows that he's not a whole lot more than a stranger in this land that God has promised him. But he has that sliver of something to hold on to hope. He accepts that familiar responsibility, the family responsibility. He goes and rescues his nephew Lot, captured in the earliest recorded war story ever. And when the king of Sodom tries to reward him for leading him to victory, Abraham says, you can keep your lousy gold. Nobody's going to say that Abraham got rich from a king of a disreputable place like Sodom. Lot, on the other hand, you might remember, lives in Sodom. So, when Abraham's wife Sarah dies, he bargains for the property that had a cave where he could bury her, and he does not accept the offer of the Hittites just to bury his dead. He pays for it, top shekel. No one would have had the chance to say the land didn't really belong to him. And at the end of his life, he takes on another wife. He had Sarah and Hagar, and at the end of his life, he hooks up with Keturah, has 6 children from her, and he makes sure that all his children from that marriage are taken care of. So he's covered all the bases in his life, everything that he had set up, so that everything would continue on when he was gone. Total responsibility all the time. And the scope of his responsibility, from the personal to the collective, is just really incredible. He's fiercely loyal to his clan, his family, but not just that. He assumes responsibility in the face of the outsiders around him. He has a responsibility to live in the world with people who are not like him. And we do this today. All of us do this today. I don't think there's probably anybody watching this right now who doesn't realize that we need all the people who aren't Jewish. We need to deal with and to interact with and have relations with people who are not exactly like us. Our lives involve and depend on those outside our world. And Abraham points to the proper attitude of exchange and respect that we need to survive in this great big world. And that does not mean giving in, and it does not mean denying who we are, but we relate to an outside world while retaining our identity and our pride in that identification. I'm willing to bet almost everybody has had that experience when they realize that the world isn't just Jewish, and we have to relate to the world outside. We don't live in a vacuum. And we've all, at least many of us, have had that moment when we realized that in those interactions with outside people, we represent our community to them. And we realize that if we treat them badly in business, they think that Jews cheat. If we keep entirely to ourselves, Jews are closed-minded, cliquish, and clannish. We also know how to hold on to our identity. And we've seen the byproduct of keeping our faith. And when we do, non-Jews usually respect Jews who respect Judaism. That helps us get through this time and into the next generation. Abraham is our big example. Abraham teaches us to stand up for ourselves and reach out to others. Abraham goes beyond Adam and Eve and Noah and the Babylonians. You know the thing about the Babylonians, did I mention Tony Fauci? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah. The kind of, I want to clarify about the Babylonians, they're not caring. You know, they asked Tony Fauci, what do you think of all these people not wearing masks or social distancing? And he says, I just don't know how to explain to you that you should care about other people. I mean, it's really that simple. Abraham helps us see past Adam, Eve, Noah, and the Babylonians, and also see past Spinoza, Marx, and Freud. He teaches us to be honest and faithful and not to roll over under adversity, but to stand proudly together. And he teaches us not to blame anybody else. And in that spirit, I'm going to say, if you haven't already done it, get out there and vote. That's your responsibility for this week. Get that done. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Yashkal.
All right, now, this week's Parsha is going to start, our reading will start Genesis chapter 14, verse 1, page 77 in the Eitz Chaim.
Shall I begin?
Let me just introduce the Parsha.
Okay.
In the first Aliyah, on page 77, verse 1, we start this week with the world's earliest war story, the War of the Five Kings versus the Four Kings, and their names are spelled out here, and I'm not going to risk mispronouncing them. That's page 77. We're ready when you are.
ויהי בימי אמרפל מלך שינהר אריות מלך אלעזר כדר לעומר מלך אלה ותירא מלך גויים עשו מלחמה את ברע מלך סדום ואת בירשה מלך עמורה שינב מלך אדמה ושם עבר מלך צבויים ומלך בלה צוואר כל אלה חברו אל עמק השסידים הוא ים המלך 12 שנה עבדו את חידר לעומר, ו13 שנה מרדו, ו14 שנה בחדר לעומר, המלאכים אשר איתו, ויכו את רפאים, בסטרות קרניים, ואת הזוזים בהם, ואת האימים, בשבי קרייתיים, ואת החורים בהרם שעיר, עד אל פרן אשר על המדבר, וישובו, ויבואו, אל עין משפטי קדש, ויכו את כל שדה המלאכי, וגם את המורי, היושב בחצוצות תמר. ויצא מלך סדום, ומלך עמורה, ומלך אדמה, ומלך צבויים, ומלך בלה צוואר, וערכו איתו מלחמה בעמק הסידים. Eid Kedar Laomer Melech Elam, Vatidal Melech Goyim, Vamrafer Melech Shinar, Varyoch Melech Elazar, Arba Melachim, and Achamisha.
4 kings against the 5. In the second Aliyah, starting on page 79 with verse 10, the bad kings invade the city-states of Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah, and they kidnap Lot. That's Avram's nephew. Now, note that he's not yet Avraham. He's still Avram. A fugitive brings news to Avram at Alonei Mamre. And Avram springs into action, assembling all the men in his household, all 318 of them, that's a pretty big household, to go rescue Lot. And they set out at night, and within a verse, Avram's forces beat the 5 kings and bring back the treasures of Sodom and Amorah, and they bring back Lot and his possessions and his family. So we're on page 79, verse 10.
Ve'emek hasidim, berod chemar, vayanusu melech Sodom v'Amorah, vayiplu shama, vanisharim hera nasu, vayichu, et kol rechu Sodom Amorah, et kol achlam, vayilechu, vayichu elod, v'rechu shom, v'nachi Avram, vayilechu, v'yoshev b'Sodom, v'yavo ha'palit, v'yagil Avram ha'ivri, Vehu shochin ve'lonei mamre amori achi eshkol achi einahar ve'imali v'rit Avram vayishma Avram ki nishba achiv vayarek et chanichav lidei vedo shmana asar shlosh meyod vayirdov adan vayichalik alehem lailahu vadav vayakim vayirdevim ad chova Asher mismol la damasek, vayashev eid kol harchush v'gam et lod achti v'rchusho heshiv v'gam et hanashim betam.
The third Aliyah, beginning on page 80 with chapter 14, verse 17. Avram comes home triumphant from the war of the 4 against the 5, and he's greeted by the king of Sodom and King Melchizedek, a priest of God Most High. He's got one line in the Torah, Melchizedek does, but it shows that others were already worshiping our God. Melchizedek's line in the city would have become, Melchizedek's line in the city that would become Jerusalem does not seem to last. His descendants don't seem to stay king. And the next line of priest resumes with Aaron, Moses' brother, about 400 years after that. Melchizedek here blesses Avram. And I just want to point out that a lot of Christian theologians point to Melchizedek and saying, there, you see, even before Abraham got the covenant with God, there was a relationship with God. And that's one of the things they use to justify their claim on Abraham.
Vayitzi melech Sodom likrato acharei shuvo me'akad et kedar laomer ve'lamalachim asher ito el emek shavehi hu emek hamelech v'malkitzedek melech shalim hotzi lechem vayayin ve'hu kohen le'el elyon ve'yevarchehu vayomar baruch Avram le'el elyon konei shamayim va'aretz baruch el elyon Asher migin sarecha biyadecha, vayiten lo ma'aser mikol.
Okay. In the fourth Aliyah, on page 81, chapter 14, verse 21, the king of Sodom tries to give Avram a reward, like we talked about. And Avram, as we mentioned, does not take the reward. He doesn't want anyone to think he got rich off of the king of a slimeball city like Sodom. Sodom may not have been the aggressor in the war, but they've got a bad reputation. And Avram's men are allowed to take only what it cost them to go on this war expedition. So they get paid back for what they put out, but they don't get rich from the king of Sodom.
V'yomer melech Sodom el Avram, תן לי הנפש והרכוש, קח לך, ואומר אברהם המלך צדוק, הרימותי ידי אל אדוני אל עליון, קונה שמיים וארץ, אם ייחוד ועד סרוך נעל, ואם אקח מכל אשר לך, ולא תאמר אני השארתי את אברהם בלעדי, רק אשר אכלו הנערים וחלק הנשים אשר הלכו איתי, הנר אשכול וממרא הם יאכלו חלקם.
We're at the beginning of chapter 15, page 82 in the Eitz Chaim. God comes to Avram and promises to protect and reward him. The only reward Avram wants is children, and he doesn't think God can give him what he wants. But God promises that Avram's progeny, his offspring, his descendants, will be as numerous as the stars in the sky. And Avram trusts God, and he'll be rewarded for that.
אחר הדברים האלה, הדבר אדוני אל אברהם, במחזה לאמור, אל תירא אברהם, אנוכי מגן לך, שכרך הרבה מאוד, ויאמר אברהם, אדוני אדוני, מה תיתן לי, ואנוכי הולך ערירי, ובן משק ביתי, הודה משק אליעזר, ויאמר אברהם, הן לי לא נתת הזרע, והנה בן ביתי יורש אותי, והנה דבר אדוני אליו לאמור, לא ירשך זה כי אם אשר יצא ממך הוא ירשך, ויוצא אותה החוצה ויאמר, הבן השמיימה וספור הכוכבים אם תוכל לספור אותם, ואומר לו כל יהיה זרעך והאמין באדוני ויחשבה לו צדקה.
We're on page 83 in the Eitz Chaim, chapter 15, verse 7. God continues his offer to Avram. God instructs Avram to gather some animals, and this is a very strange scene, and I'm not sure how much we would like to televise it, but he splits the animals in two and arranges them on the ground, and Avram falls into a deep sleep, and he receives a disturbing vision. And in this vision, God tells Avram that his people will be strangers in a strange land, enslaved. But judgment will be served on the enslavers, and the people will go free with great wealth, and they will return to this land. The timing is a little cumbersome, but the reason the people will come back here is that the local people are sinful, and they will be replaced by Avram's descendants. We're on page 83, verse 7.
ויאמר אליו אני אדוני אשר הוצאתיך מאור כסדים לתת לך את הארץ הזאת לרשתה ויאמר אדוני אדוני במה אדע כי ארישנה ויאמר אליו ככלי עגלה משולשת ועז משולשת ואיל משולש ותור וגוזל ויקח לו את כל אלה ויבטר אותם בתווך ויתן איש ביתרו לקראת רעהו, והציפור לו ותר, וירד העיד על הפיגרים, וישב אותם אברהם, ויהי השמש לבוא, ותרדמה נפלה על אברהם, והנה אימה, חשיכה גדולה נופלת עליו, ויאמר לאברהם, ידעתי דע, כי גר יהיה זרעך בארץ, לא להם, ועבדום ועינו אותם 400 שנה, וגם את הגוי אשר יעבדו דן אנוכי, ואחרי כן יצאו ברכוש גדול, ואתה תבוא אל אבותיך בשלום, תיקבר בשיבה טובה, ודור רביעי ישוב הנה כי לא שלם עוון אמורי עד הנה.
In the seventh aliyah today, we're starting on page 85 with chapter 15, verse 17. The sun sets, and a fiery furnace appears, and a torch appears to float between the pieces of the sacrifices. God finishes his promise that Avram's descendants will inherit this land. It's page 85, verse 17.
Vayhi Hashem Ashba'a Ve'alata Haya V'nei Tanur Ashan Ve'lapihiri Shasher Avar Bein Hagzarim Ha'ile Bayom Ha'hu Kara Adonai Et Avram Berid Lemor Lizaracha Natati Et Haaretz Azot Min Har Mitzrayim Ad Nahar Gadol Nahar Pirad Et Akini Vet Aknizi Vet HaKadmoni Vet Achiti, Vet HaPrisi, Vet HaRefaim, Vet HaMori, Vet HaKnani, Vet HaGirgashi, Vet HaYevusi.
Okay, those are a list of some of the people who are currently occupying the land of Canaan. Before we move on to the Haftarah, I think it's probably a good thing to do the Mishaberet.
Yes. Yishbeirach avoteinu mikor habiracha limolteinu. May the source of strength bless the ones before us. Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Mishebeirach Imotenu Mikor HaBiracha Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing, with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
Now, we'll move on to the Haftarah. Just a quick word about the Haftarah. It's from the book of Isaiah, chapter 40. And it's an encouraging Haftarah. The prophet calls for the people of Abraham to return to the land. Don't you know, God keeps his promises. The connection is that we're talking about the promise made to the descendants of Abraham, and here's how it worked out.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'neviim tovim ratzah v'divreihem הנאמרים באמת ברוך אתה אדוני המכיר בתורה ומשה עבדו וישראל עמו בנביאי האמת והצדק.
Page 95 in the Eitz Chaim.
למה תאמר יעקב ותדבר ישראל נסתרה דרכי מאדוני ומאלוהי משפטי יעבור הלא ידעת אם לא שמעת אלוהי עולם אדוני בוראי קצות הארץ ולא יהיה ולא ייגע אין חקר לתבונתו נוטיף ליף כוח לעינונים עצמי הרבה ויפו נערים ויגעו ולבחורים כאשר יגשילו וגולי אדוני יחליפו כוח יעלו עבר כנשרים ירוצו ולא ייגעו יאכלו ולא יאהבו החרישו אליים ולאומים יחליפו כוח ייגשו אז ידברו יחדיו למשפט נקרבה מהר ממזרח צדק יקראו לרגלו ייתן לבניו גויים ומלכים ירד ייתן כעבר חרבו כי כשנידיו קשתו ירדפים יעבור שלום אורך ברגלו לא יבוא מפעל ועשה קורא הדורות מראש אני אדוני ראשון ואחרונים אני הוא ראו אם יראו קצות הארץ יחרדו קרבו ויתיון איש את רעהו יעזרו ולאחיו יאמר חזק ויחזק חרש את שריף מחליק פטיש את חולם פעם אומר לדבק תאהבו ויחזקאל ומסמירים לא ימות ואתה ישראל עבדי יעקב אשר בחרתיך זרע אברהם אוהבי אשר חזקתיך מקצות הארץ ומאציליה יראתיך ואמר לך עבדי אתה בחרתיך ולא מסתיך אל תירא כי עמך אני אל תשתהה כי אני אלוהיך אימצתיך אף עזרתיך אף תמר אף תמכתיך בימין צדקי הנה שובי גם כל הנחרים בך ילכי עין ויעבדו אנשי ריבך תבקשי לא תמצאים אנשי מצאותך ילכי עין וכאפס אנשי מלחמתך כי אני אדוני אלוהיך מחזיק ימינך אומר לך אל תירא אני עזרתיך אל תראי תולעת יעקב מתי ישראל אני עזרתיך נאום אדוני וגואלך קדוש ישראל הנה שמתיך למורג חרוץ חדש בעל פיתיות תדוש הרים בתדוק וגבעות כמוץ תשים תזרעי מרוח תסעים ושרה תביא סותם ואתה תגיל באדוני בקדוש ישראל תתהלל ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם צור כל עולמים צדיק בכל דורות הילה נאמן האומר ויוסף מדבר מקיים שכל דבריו אמת וצדק נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו ונאמנים דבריך ודבר אחד מדבריך אך אולי אשוברי גם כי המלך נאמן רחמן אתה ברוך אתה אדוני אלא נאמן בכל דבריו רחים על ציון כי בית חיים ובלעלו בנפש תושיע במהרה בימינו ברוך אתה אדוני משמח ציון בבניה שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו מלך הנביא עבדיך ומלכות בית דוד משיחך במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו על גזע לא ישב זר ולא ינחלו עוד אחרים מכבודו כי בשם קודשך נשבעת עליו שלא יכבה נראה לעולם בעת ברוך אתה אדוני מגן דוד על התורה ועל העבודה ועל נביאים ועל יום השבת הזה שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו לקדושה ולמנוחה לכבוד ולתפארת על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך ברוך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם בעת ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת.
Amen.
And I want to dedicate that Haftorah to my brother David. This is his Haftorah Sedra, and given his age, this will be the fourth complete cycle since his bar mitzvah. 13, 13, 13, 13. And one other thing, so mazel tov to David. And one other thing I'd like to note is Rabbi Kiefer used to say, in the whole Tanakh, this is the one place where God refers to somebody as his friend. And so when I read this in verse 8, Zerah Abraham, the seed of Abraham, Ohavi, my beloved.
Yeah. God didn't seem to have a lot of friends. I don't know. Okay, so we're moving on to page 148 in the Siddur, and we'll read the last paragraph on the page as a prayer for our country. May this land, under your providence, be an influence for good throughout the world, uniting all people in peace and freedom, helping them to fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they experience war anymore. And let us say, Amen. Lo yisagoy el goy cheref, lo yilmedu od milchama. Lo yisagoy el goy cheref, lo yilmedu od milchama. V'nomar Amen. Mokor Chaim, source of all life, we ask for a quick end to hostilities around the world and the swift and safe return of our young men and women to their homes, and let us all say,
Amen.
On page 149, a prayer for the state of Israel. Avinu shebashamayim, tzur Yisrael v'go'olo, barechem medinat Yisrael, reshit smichat gulatenu. הגן עליה בעברת חסדך, ופרוס עליה סוכת שלומך. ושלח אורך ויעמידך לראשיה, שריה ויועציה, ותקנם בעצה טובה מלפניך. חזק את ידי מגיני ארץ קודשנו, והנחילם אלוהינו ישועה, ויתר ניצחון תיאטרם. ונתת שלום בארץ, ושמחת עולם ליושביה, ונאמר Amen. And we're not announcing a new month. We're moving straight ahead to the Ashrei part of the service.
Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha Odi Hallelujah Selah.
Ashrei העם שככה לו, אשרי העם שאדוני אלוהיו.
Tila LeDavid Abimelech Elohai HaMelech Baruch Hashemcha Leolam Va'ed.
בכל יום אברכך, ועלה שמך לעולם ועד.
Gadol Adonai Mehulam Miyahod V'Ligrato Ve'in Cheker.
דור לדור ישבח מעשיך, וגבורתך יגידו.
Adar Kevad Ahodecha V'Divrei Niflodecha Asicha.
ועזוז נורותיך יאמרו, וגדולתך ספרנה.
Sikirav Duvraya Habihu V'Tzid Gadecha Yiranenu.
חנון ורחום אדוני, ערך אפיים וגדול חסד.
Hov Adonai Lahakol V'Racha Hamaval Kol Ma'asav.
אדוני כל מעשיך, וחסידיך יברכוך.
Kivod Malachodecha Yahameru Gevuradecha Yidaberu.
להודיע לבני האדם גבורותיו, וכבוד הדר מלכותו.
Malchodecha Malchut Gadolamim Umemzadecha Bechod Arvador.
סומך אדוני לכל הנופלים, וזוקף לכל הכפופים.
Hine Chalelecha Yisahabehiru Vatanodin Lahem Edoklam B'ito.
פותח את ידיך, ומשביע לכל חרצון.
Tzadik Adonai B'chod Yiracha V'chasid B'chol Ma'asav.
קרוב אדוני לכל קורב, לכל אשר יקראו באמת.
Ritzon Yimea V'yahaseh V'yed Shabbat HaBishma V'yoshim.
שומר אדוני את כל אוהביו, ואת כל רשעים ישמיד.
Tzilat Adonai Yidaber Bi V'varech B'basar Shem Kol Shol Olam Ba'ed. V'anachnu Nivarech Ya Me'ata V'yad Olam. Hallelujah.
And now, we turn to page 155 for the Chatzi Kaddish that ends the Torah service and brings us into the Musaf.
Yidgad Havigad Hashem Rabba.
Amen.
B'yalma Divrach Re'utei V'yamelech Malchutei. B'chayichon v'yomechon. V'chayidecho b'it Yisrael. Bagala, bagala. V'lizmar gari v'imrel.
Amen.
Yesh me Rabba Mivorach. L'olam lo me'almaya. Yidbarach, Yidbarach v'ishtabach, V'yidbar v'yitman v'yitnaseh v'yidhadar, V'yitaleh v'yitalal shemedei kodeshah,
Brechu.
V'yila min kol bir lachada v'shirada, Tushbecha Davinechem Adam Damiran Bialma Vimrel.
Amen. We will pray together with the Musaf Amidah on page 156b, and we will stay together out loud together from 157 for the Kedusha, and then we will finish silently 158 through 161.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei Avoteinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel Elohei Leah Hayel HaGadol HaGiblu V'Hanora El Elyon Gamel Chazadim Tovim Mekonei HaGahom V'Dacher Chasei Avot Mevi Goel Livnei V'Nehem L'Iman Shemo B'Yahava Melech Hazel V'Gin U'Mashiach Magen Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham V'Gid Zara Ada Gibor Le'olam Adonai Melchei Mitim Adar L'Hoshia Mashiach Ruach Morid HaGashem Mechakel Chayim Bechesed Mechayim Eidim Birachamim Abim Samech Nafim Verovech Olim Umadir Asurim Umekayim Ebunadali Shenei Afar Michamocha Bagivurot Umida Melach Melech Mimi Umechayim Umasmiach Yeshua V'neman Adalach Eod Midim Baruch Atah Adonai Mechayei HaMetim
157.
Na'aritzecha V'nagishecha Kisoh Siyah Sarvei Godet Hamakdishim Shimcha Bakodesh Kakatu Ayan Neviecha Vikarazeh El Seviyamar Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Tzivahot Melech Haaretz Givodo Givodo Mali Yohalam Misharit Av Shalim Zelazeh Ayim Gam Givodo Ilmadam Baruch Yomeru Baruch Yivonai Mim Gomo Mim Gomo Mim Gama Liven Birachamim V'yachanam Av Shema Erev Avager B'chayom David Pamayim Be'ahava Shema Omrim Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Hu Eloheinu Hu Avinu Hu Makeinu Hu Mashiachenu Ve'hu Yashmi'enu Biracham Alav Sheni Le'einei Kolochai Le'olachem Le'Elohim
Ani Adonai Elohechem
Ravei divrei kol shecha katuv le'mor Yimloch Adonai le'olam V'chayim Zion L'dor Hallelujah L'dohav Adonai Gidgalecha L'netzach netzach Im B'rushadecha nagdish V'shivchacha Eloheinu mipinu lo yamus le'olam ba'ed Ki el melch gadol v'kadosh Ata Baruch Atah Adonai Ha'el HaGadol.
Amen. Page 158 to 161. We conclude the Musaf and head into our ending prayers on page 181 with Kaddish Shalem.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Yesh mei rabba mevora. Yolam olam el maya. Yidbarach. Yidbarach shtabach. Yidbarach v'na seved ravi ravi al shebei de kodesha.
Brechu.
Elam mikabercha dav shivata. Jumachadav nachbata. Dam ram lama ve'yimru.
Amen.
Yid kabasotan v'adam noch Yisrael. Kodav mishmaya ve'yimru.
Amen.
Yesh lam rabba min shemai v'chaim alim. V'akol Yisrael ve'yimru.
Amen.
Oseh shalom imramav,
Uyaseh shalom aleinu, v'yal kol Yisrael.
V'imru,
Imru, amen.
Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, v'yal kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom, shalom aleinu, v'yal kol Yisrael imru. Amen.
Page 182, Ein Keloheinu.
Ein Keloheinu, Ein Kadonenu, Ein Kemalkeinu, Ein Kemoshienu, Mi Keloheinu, Mi Kadonenu, Mi Kemalkeinu, Mi Kemoshienu. Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Shekniru, Avodeinu, Livanecha Gedoret Asami.
183, Aleinu L'Shabech.
Alina L'Shabech L'Adon HaKol, Atik G'dula Yotzer Breishi, Shelo Asanu K'Kuyar Atzad, Velo Samanu K'Mish Bechot Adama, Shelo Samchel Kinu Kalem, Vigahur Alinu, Kechoramonam, Vanachnu Korim, Umishachavim Umorim, Livnei Melech, Machi HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shehu Noteh Shamayim ve'Yoseh Haaretz,
Yikaro b'shamayim imaw, Shkinanu zo,
B'govei miromim, Hu Eloheinu, Ein Od. Kakatzus b'toratecha, Adonai Yimloch le'olam va'ed, v'nemar, v'haya Adonai, limelech kol haaretz, bayom hahu, yeh Adonai echad, u'shimo echad, u'shimo echad.
In solemn testimony to the unbroken faith which links one generation to the next, those in mourning or observing a yahrzeit now rise to praise God's name with the words of the mourner's Kaddish on page 184. But first, yahrzeits observed this week include Ida Berger, Bert Bierman, Marjorie Birmingham, Emil Bitten, William Blank, Baron Herschel Brooks. I don't know why it's yeah, it's supposed to be Rabbi Herschel Brooks. Jacob Budger, Gertrude Cutler, Florence Leah Emerson, Ellie Entine, Rose Flower, Rose Franzblau, Abraham Freundlich, Freda M. Garretts, Alvin David Ginsberg, Daniel David Eisenberg, Ida Lipsky, Harold Mandel, Rivka Mandelsaft, Sally Marcus, Charlene Levin Marsh, Ellie Messy, Abe Michelin, Sylvia Moran, Abraham Neiman, Harold Nissen, Walter Notkin, Lena Frumkin-Rostin, Anna Rubin, B. Ruchin, Benjamin Samuels, Wynne Silver, Julius Stein, Hyman Sukov, the victims of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Isaac Testa, Nathan Tershwell, Harry Waldman, Heather Daniel Weisbuck, and Dave Weiner. Mourner's Kaddish is on 184.
Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'alma divarach dirute v'amlich machute v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kariv v'imru.
Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevorach Le'olam U'Lomei Maya.
Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shemei d'kudisha
Barichu.
le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata d'amiran b'alma v'yimru.
Amen.
Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimru.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mromav v'yaseh shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'yimru.
Amen. And if you're not standing, maybe you should, because we're going to do Kiddush. If you can, if it's comfortable.
V'shamiru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat La'asad et ha-Shabbat L'dorot amrit olam Be'eni u'v'nei Yisrael oti Le'olam gishez edamim Asad Adonai et ha-shamayim et ha'aretz Uvayom ha-shvi Shabbat v'yinavash Ha'gim birach na'edem ha-Shabbat v'yinashehel Safrai Marnan Ramnan Rabotai.
L'chaim.
Baruch atah Adonai. Eloheinu melech haolam. Borei b'ri hagafen.
Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kadishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al netilat yadayim.
Amen.
פותח את ידיך ומסביר לכוחי רצון ברשות. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם המוציא לחם מן הארץ.
Amen. You're going to say, good as the day they actually made it.
Better. It aged well.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't have a whole lot of announcements. Well, I sent out an email reminding us of things that are happening this weekend, including last night and this morning. And there's that Jonathan's project.
Yeah, I can just update you on that. Jonathan Dunn is doing his Eagle Scout project is it called Home of Peace?
Yeah.
Home of Peace Cemetery in Whittier. It's one of the oldest cemeteries actually in California. It's a Jewish cemetery. Two of the Stooges are buried there. I believe the Warner brothers are buried there. And I know all of us have been there for burials for relatives of members of our congregation. In any event, what he's doing is he's going through the cemetery and he's trying to identify those people who are veterans so they can put a special designation on their gravestone and affix to their stone something to receive a American flag for Memorial Day and Labor Day, other occasions where it's appropriate. So he's asking for volunteers to help him tomorrow And again, on the 8th, Sunday the 8th, his number's on the bottom of the email. Give him a phone call if you can make it, and let him know what time you can come. Yvette and I will be there tomorrow sometime. We went last week, and it was a very rewarding experience. You know, it was very fulfilling. That's the best way to put it. So anyway, if you can help, and he's also looking, of course, for donations. If you can't make it to the cemetery, you can support him financially so that he can achieve his goal to honor these veterans. That would be fantastic. So there it is.
And we wanted to remind you to set your clocks back tonight before you go to bed,
Yeah.
so you get that extra hour of sleep. I know I'll need it. And make sure that if you haven't already done it, go and vote.
Yeah, and one last thing. Like I said at the beginning of the service, for some of you who might not have been here, we can monitor the service now to know whether we're live streaming or not. So just bear with us. We will be there, and we appreciate your patience.
Do we ever? Page 187, Adonola.
Let's see. I wanted to do this melody.
Okay.
Adonolam, Shem Malach, B'terem Kol, Yitzir Nivra, V'nasa V'chefso Kol, Hazai Melech Shemo Nikra, V'yacharei Gichlot HaKol, V'vado Yimloch Nora, V'hu Haya, V'hu Hoveh, V'hu Yeh B'tifara, Adonolam, Shem Malach, B'terem Kol, Yitzir Nivra, V'nasa V'chefso Kol, Hazai Melech Shemo Nikra, V'hu Echad V'ein Sheni, V'am Shelo Le'achbira, V'li Reshit, V'li Tachlit, V'lo Ha'od V'ha'misra, Adonolam, Hashem Allah, B'terem Kol, Yitzir Nivra, V'nasa V'chefso Kol, Hazai Melech Shemo Nikra, V'hu Eli,
V'chai Goali,
B'tzarchev li b'eit tzara, V'hu nisi, U'manos li, V'nadkosi b'yom
Biomekra.
Adonolam, Asher Malach, B'terem Kol, Yitzir Nivra, V'nasa V'chefso Kol, Hazai Melech Shemo Nikra, B'yado av kidruchi, V'yein ishan v'ya'ira, V'imruchi giviyati, Adonai li v'lo ira, Adonolam, Asher Malach, B'terem Kol, Yitzir Nivra, V'nasa V'chefso Kol, Hazai Melech Shemo Nikra.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.